is up, everyone? I'm Jeff London. This is the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast, where we are intolerant of weak-minded attitudes that keep people from pursuing new and exciting things in the areas of fitness, outdoors, and general lifestyle. My guest today is Kayla Roys. She works at the Alaska Fly Fishing Goods in Juneau. We're going to talk steelhead fishing. We're going to talk trout fishing. We're going to talk the best Southeast Alaska places to go. Talk about rod and reel selection and maintenance and a whole bunch of good stuff. That's all coming up in episode 34. Check it out. Yeah, I would say the biggest thing about California that I miss is there's a lot of different rivers, and if you want to fish brown trout, rainbow trout, you can get those. You can go up in the High Sierra, and you got golden trout, which is totally different because you're fishing with a one weight, and you're just posted up on this piece of granite, and you're laying down, and you're dabbing it on the surface, or you're making a long cast, hoping that the second it hits and the fish hits, because they're so timid that if the fly drags at all in the water, it's not going to take. But then you get back in the car and you're in California. You know, you're in Yosemite and there's millions of people around, so that's not fun at all. But
that's the difference.
Yeah, you don't get that same experience here.
No, Alaska is great. I mean, you can jump in your car and within 20 minutes you're in remote Alaska fishing by yourself.
Yeah. Well, even you're in Juneau. And we'll talk about those rivers around there too. But I can't imagine. I have some buddies that live in the Anchorage area, and there's so much more available. You go down the Kenai Peninsula, and so many different rivers and creeks, and the resident trout are so much bigger than they are in Southeast. You can get some nice fish, 16, 18, 20, pushing 22, depending on where you go. But that's kind of the average in those spots. So. We live in Alaska, but it's the JV Rainbow Alaska compared to up there.
Oh yeah, we're like the intramurals down here in Juneau.
Yeah. What are some of the spots? I've never fished up there. Grew up on Prince of Wales and fished those spots, and it's a pretty big island, and so you have big water, lots of food, and so the rainbows can get decent size, but they're not anything like the Iliamna or anything. But what's Juneau like for fishing for trout?
Juneau's interesting. It's totally different even from Ketchikan, and Prince of Wales and whatnot. Our predominant trout are like Dolly Varden and cutthroat. And there are rainbows in a few systems. Those systems being the ones that hold, that have steelhead in them. But beyond that, that's it. We got dollies, we got cutthroat, and we have some rainbows. But if you catch a rainbow, like you're doing really good.
I love Dolly Varden. Like they're so fun to catch. They really get a bad name. I read somewhere, I think it was in an old Alaska magazine, that in the early teens or 20s, they were so afraid. I don't know who the they was. That pronoun applies to some group of people. Were so afraid that the Dolly Varden would decimate the sockeye and other salmon populations that they had a bounty on Dolly Varden, and you're getting like a penny a tail for Dolly Varden. They were trying to get rid of them. Yeah. Which is crazy because obviously the salmon had survived to that point, so there didn't need to be any messing around with that. But now, 100 years later, there's a ton of Dolly Varden. They're fun to catch. They're feisty little fish, and they're pretty in their own right. And it's the only of those three that you mentioned, the cutthroat, the rainbow, and the dolly. That's the only one that I even consider killing and cooking on a riverside fire, just because they're a little more plentiful, and cutthroats are just too pretty to kill. And then rainbows are, same thing. But
the unicorn.
Yeah, for you, like we get, there's a couple different rivers that have a lot more rainbows than cutthroats. And a couple other spots where you're catching a bunch of cutthroats, but they're not super big. You posted on Instagram today or yesterday, pretty good looking fish. Was that a rainbow or was that a cutthroat? Couldn't really see.
It was a king.
No way. No,
yeah.
No. I must be thinking about a different photo then.
I don't know.
It was in the net.
Yeah, it was definitely a king. It was a rogue king that I thought it was something else. That's why it was such a surprise.
By the way, you can do your plug right now for your Instagram while I look at this picture and investigate. Do your Instagram plug and your and all that.
There was one. Well, I posted one a couple days ago. The fish jumping in the net. So that was the Dolly Varden. So yeah, my little Instagram handle is AK Fly Shop Girl. The name was sort of given to me. I've worked at Alaska Fly Fishing Goods for going on 5 years now, and so it's just been sort of the thing. Like, oh, you're Fly Shop Girl. Like, okay, yeah, I've heard of you.
Nice.
So the name was sort of given to me. After a season or so working there, so it's grown on me now.
So, yeah, sometimes you just got to go with it.
I know. It's a love-hate.
It's just the spots are so close together and so abundant. If you just glance down at the photo, it totally looks like it's a doesn't have much. It's like been rubbed out. The side has been rubbed. Well, yeah, that's definitely a king. That's crazy.
As you zoom in, yeah, it was definitely a Jack King, and it was in a river it shouldn't have been in. So it was very interesting. It was. I mean, I thought it was the biggest cutthroat I'd ever caught in my life, or a rainbow. I didn't know what it was. There was a lot of like, well, what is this? What is this? And on a 4-weight nonetheless. So,
yeah.
Yeah. It was an exciting little endeavor.
Yeah. So what do you fish? What you use 4-weight for your dollies and your rainbows and your small Jack Rogue Kings. And what's your outfit like for that? And then we'll talk about real king salmon fishing in a little bit.
Yeah.
What's your rig?
I mean, so like beginning the season, like we definitely have some steelhead fishing here in Juneau. There's like 2 river systems in town that have spring run steelhead, but we don't really have any that are big enough for fall. So the sort of go-to setup for that would be like an 8-weight fly rod. You can use a 7 or an 8. Typically just an 8 is the all-around salmon rod. So that's typically, what I suggest for anyone that's looking to target like any steelhead, any chum, any silver, even pinks. My go-to trout rod, the trout rod varies for me. We do a lot of estuary fishing in Juneau, so the dollies and cuts, as they're out migrating out of the lakes in the spring, they're like gorging themselves on salmon fry, and so a lot of times in those estuaries we'll encounter some wind, and so I typically use my 5-weight for that, just so I can really like huck a fly out there. But in the creeks and whatnot, I've actually like a 4-weight is pretty great. And then I've been starting to use my little 7.5-foot 3-weight a lot more than not, just to throw small things at trout. So, I don't know that I would suggest that to everyone, but a 4 or a 5 is pretty ideal for our sort of the trout around here. Just, they range anywhere from like 8 inches to 20 inches and sort of anywhere in between. And depending on the time of year, they're either really skinny or really fat. So a 4 or 5 is great for trout, and sort of the 8 is the ideal for all around salmon steelhead fishing.
Is there a brand of rod and reel that you've kind of liked and use or become accustomed to, or are you whatever you can get your hands off?
I know. That I go back and forth. I sort of was raised fishing with my grandfather and my dad, and my grandfather always like, put in my brain, like, buy it once and it's best. So, quality over quantity, I guess. And so I grew up fishing like sage rods, which are made in Bainbridge Island, Washington. And man, they're a great rod. Over, the last couple of years, I've been slowly spoiling myself more and more. And I'm switching everything over to Winston, which is even, they're both in the higher price range of fly rods.
Right.
Winston's sort of just a dream to cast, though. It's like a slower, even the salmon rods, you get like a trout rod feel to it, which is awesome. And, the company that I go back to, though, that I really like is Echo. So Echo Fly Fishing, they're like based in Oregon, and they make a really awesome like bang for the buck rod. I've been impressed with their rods over the last few years. So I sort of go between those 3 companies. I own rods from each of the companies. So yeah, reels are all over the place. Southeast Alaska is weird because we do so much. I mean, at least in Juneau, and I'd assume in Ketchikan and Prince of Wales too, is that you're so close to the estuary sometimes that you're getting that like salt water and you're getting that glacial silt in the mix of the water, and it just blows reels up. Even working at the shop, I see a lot of reels that come in that people are like, I don't know what happened, and it's like, well, okay, like a year of glacial silt and salt water, that's what happened. So I typically try to steer people towards, a pretty decent like machined aluminum reel, be it like Lamson or Sage, Nautilus or Hatch, something that gives you a little bit more support while you're in these weird conditions that Alaska provides you with.
Yeah. I started off Sage. That was like the first time I jumped up from, I had a TFO, which was really nice. And that was kind of a bang for the buck. You could get, at Bass Pro had $160, got you a rod and a reel. And I liked the rod a lot, but then I went premium with the Sage. Mm-hmm. Unless you're rich, you can't really, I'm going to go premium Sage and premium Winston. You can't just kind of do that. It's, you choose the one that you have. And I've been really curious by Winston. I know that last time I was in the shop, we talked about Winston rods a little bit, and I have some buddies that really, really like Winstons too, but I'm just Sage because it happened to be there.
Yeah.
And then I have an Echo switch rod, which I really like. And I don't have any other Echo rod, but a lot of buddies of mine who do fish the Echoes really, really like them. Mm-hmm. As far as reels go, what about maintenance? Like, what do you suggest maintenance-wise? How can you take care of those reels? You said that fully machined is kind of the way to go, but how can someone who is not going to take it into a shop lot, how can they just routine maintenance? How often do you do stuff, and what do you do?
I try not to do too much. I find that people that like take their reels apart constantly and clean them out and whatnot, well, I mean, you're more apt to lose parts that way. So minimize your loss, and just, after fishing in, salty or dirty or whatever water you're fishing in, just rinse it out with fresh water on your tap and just let it dry out. And I try, I tell myself at least like once every month or so to like, run just a wet paper towel down my line to try to get like the residue off. And then just let it be. There's some reels that need more maintenance than others, but most of them, they really don't want you to maintain them that much. If they have major issues, the company will maintain those for you. But the more you take them apart, I got so many people that come into the shop that like are missing pieces to their reels because they tried to clean them and stuff. So it's easiest for me to just say like, let it be.
Yeah.
Rinse it out with tap water.
Yeah. Most people I've talked to have said that it's better to invest the money in a really good rod rather than a reel. Do you think it's a 50-50 thing, or do you think it's definitely buy a good rod that's good for casting and not worry so much about the reel?
That's always the struggle. It depends. I think it depends on like what species of fish you're targeting, too, which is a weird thing to invest your time and money in. But if I'm going out and I'm only chasing king salmon, I'm gonna have to rely on my reel probably more than my rod, right? If I hook a big king and it runs, like I'm gonna need a decent drag system that's not gonna seize on me. So I would invest my money there. But when it comes to a rod reel setup, just basically, I really think that a rod it'll at least make your day, like you will be happier at the end of your day if your rod is casting properly, rather than if your reel is working. Yeah. I think the higher you go up in like rod purchases too, it's not even necessarily like, it's not as much as like what the rod, they all look the same, right? They all are 9 feet long. They all are different colors, but what you're gaining in that is that you're gaining like a higher module of graphite. And so, the sort of the more like the higher the rod, the less effort you put in, the more results you get.
Yeah.
So I guess that being said, like all in all, I probably wouldn't like, I know that when I first bought my first fly rod, I walked into the shop and I was like, all right, give me the best fly rod and crappiest reel that I can get for X amount of dollars. And, that's what I went with. And needless to say, like, I replaced that reel within a year. I hated it and I still don't like it to this day, but I'm happy with that rod. It still comes out from time to time. So I think a rod makes your day.
Yeah, the biggest thing is the day 2 of fishing. So day 1, you're just out there and you're casting. And then day 2, you need to get up and you need to fish again. And your arm and your elbow and everything is just so sore and just beat up.
Yeah.
That's when you really appreciate the transfer of energy and just how important that is, that you're not wearing yourself out. That was one of the first things that I did when I moved, like from my first ever rod was one of those flugers that came in the plastic casing, for $65. You got the rod, you got the reel, you got the fly line, you got 7 flies, and all of that was terrible. As you move up, you appreciate that, and you kind of find rods that fit your casting style. As someone who works at a fly shop, what do you consider matching your your casting style to a rod? Like, what are the things that people should look for when they're looking for that sort of match?
That's a good question. So to match like the fly rod with the person, it's all in the feeling of the rod, which is interesting. So, standing in the fly shop, talking about rod, it's almost more of, I have to get a feel for the person and know how their cast will relate to them. And so, it tends to be that like women, they have a slower cast and they like to take their time and they like to feel the rod load in their hand. Whereas men, typically they're pretty good at just punching their cast and just going like as hard as they can each cast.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plans shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
And so that equates to 2 different fly rods, right? You have your slower action, Winston, or you have your faster action Sage. Right there. And so it's sort of a gauge on how that person's personality is actually, which is a really interesting thought.
Have you ever casted like a bamboo rod?
I have, yes. And there's a big push for bamboo right now and also fiberglass rods. And both of those are sort of they're an interesting specialty niche.
What would be the advantage of getting into that? Like, why would someone be convinced to buy a fiberglass or a bamboo rod? Other than like the romanticism of a bamboo rod that's been crafted and it took, this guy only made 14 in a year and, it cost you $2,000. But other than that, what's the why get a fiberglass or get a bamboo?
I think a lot of the fiberglass and bamboo, at least from my perspective, because I didn't necessarily grow up fishing either of them. For me, it's almost the nostalgia around it, and the idea that this is how fly fishing was once came about, and so graphite and boron and all these newer technologies are all they're new age, and so I want to take 3 steps back and go fish a bamboo or a fiberglass. I think that both of them, all fly rods, you get different action in your rods. And I think that fiberglass and bamboo, you definitely feel the fight of the fish more. It's more pronounced. And so I think that would be the benefit on top of just sort of the throwback to, the traditional fly rod. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it is steelhead season. I want to give the listeners as much steelhead information as possible. So where have you fished? What are you looking for? What's your rig? What are your flies? Where some of the legendary rivers, name drop? What do you got? Steelhead.
So for Southeast Alaska, man, the big river that I've fished several times is the Seatuck River in Yakutat. And the Seatuck is really, that's every steelhead angler's dream, right? It has like one of the biggest steelhead returns each year in Southeast Alaska. I think it's like 5,600 on average or something. And so it's a lot of fish. It's a beautiful river. So steelhead fishing, Southeast Alaska. A lot of the fishing that we do depends on the water conditions. The river may be, 15 miles long, but it's still creek sized. And so you get a day of rain and it really affects the water conditions and the fishing conditions. So there's been times, I've timed the river fishing just right and I have perfect flows. Most of the times it's either high or it's low. And so, generally my fly box is filled with everything in between. Big flies, little flies, anything that will hopefully catch me a fish. But the colors that I always go back to for steelhead are pink and orange and black and white. Pink and purple is always great, just all black or all white sometimes. But pink and orange is definitely one of my go-to steelhead fly colors.
You do like pretty weighted, or are they kind of light? Use what do you go with that? I like a bead head, and then like a smaller profile type fly for where I'm fishing over here, or barbell eyes to kind of sink it down. What articulated flies? What are you going there? Or hey, this is the perfect time for you to advertise exactly what your fly shop says.
It's true. Yes. Yeah. So Alaska Fly Fishing Goods, we have fly selections. We have the steelhead fly selection. We have a Seatuck River fly selection. All of which, we give you a variety because that's the big thing, right? Like, I'm sure that you've experienced it too. You go to the river and it's a foot higher than you expected. And so you now need like all of your bigger profile flies that have more weight to them. So the flies that I absolutely make sure I have in my box are the Dalai Lama, which although it sucks to cast, it really is a great fly, just because it drops to the pockets where the fish are at. It gets great action in the water, whether you're dead drifting, you're swinging, or you're, stripping the fly. Smaller flies, like a fly like the liquid wrench is great. That's an Alaska Fly Fishing Goods exclusive, but it has like a tungsten head or a tungsten bead with a jig head. And so that one also, like, it's all about, like with steelhead in Southeast Alaska, it's not necessarily like the BC traditional Atlantic salmon flies. It's big, flashy, you're really just trying to irritate these fish and get their attention. So yeah, they definitely vary. I've encountered some really low water at times where you need small flies though. So, small nymphing style patterns that are still, I say small, but it's Alaska small. So it's still a size, 6, 4. And, smaller nymphing patterns like under split shot. A lot of the flies that I throw are definitely, if I can get away with it, I like to try to swing a pattern through some runs for fish. So
yeah, I love the swinging part. It was some of these smaller rivers. You can go from nice swinging water that's not like you're down south. You're casting 40 feet in order to swing through. It's very small, consolidated swinging, and then you go up the river 100 yards, and all of a sudden you need some sort of depth charge thing, really heavy to get down because it's this really narrow chute where it's 15 feet deep. You were fishing 4 or 5 feet in a nice open area, and then all of a sudden there's a huge trough. So it's really not it's not consistent. Like you have to be ready for all different types of water. You fish a lot in Washington. How does it compare? Like how different is it fishing in the Ho and you did some of those other ones?
Yeah, it's so different, and I'm so thankful that I've gone to these places on the Olympic Peninsula and fished them, because it's an eye opener to see the big water, and you're in a float boat, and there's no way that I could walk out and know how to read the water in those systems, because I've grown up on these small creeks fishing, and the runs are so different. It's like full spay rod water, and definitely just like kind of swinging, and to me, it looks like they're all sort of Hail Mary casts, but to these guides that fish out there, like they seem to know exactly where those fish are, and I don't quite understand it. And so it's an interesting thing where, Southeast Alaska, it really is. It's, you have to read the water, and you have to read the structure in the water and know like where the current line is and where those fish are going to be like ideally hanging out. But our rivers are half the size or a quarter of the size in places. And so sometimes, that's a benefit to us that we can see where those fish are going to be.
Right. What's your temperature on using indicators? Some people feel that indicators and heavier flies because it suspends the fly and it's kind of cheating. Do you use an indicator?
I have in the past. Yeah. I mean, if I'm bead fishing, if it's low water and I'm like, I'm going to throw on a bead and catch some fish, I'll bead fish and for steelhead and definitely use an indicator. If I can get away with not using an indicator, I always will. Yeah. And that's just a personal preference. I think that I probably would catch more fish in some circumstances if I was using an indicator. I also think that I would probably catch more like rocks and trees if I was always using an indicator. So that's the struggle.
Yeah.
That's a personal preference. I can't answer that one for anyone.
Well, that's the thing. Like if the main goal is to catch fish, especially with steelhead, and they're pretty tough fish. They're not exactly the fish of 1,000 casts up here. Like you can have some good days, and every time we go to the river, I expect to catch one. Where that's the goal. Anything after that is gravy.
That's because you're spoiled down in Ketchikan and Prince of Wales, though.
I am. It's crazy. Up there the river systems are it's sharp. The mountains are so much more angry up there, and so just tumbling water for so long, and then it just kind of levels out a little bit toward the end. Whereas Prince of Wales is so docile, and even the smallest little creeks get fish, and they move up when the water is high, and then they are out of there as soon as it comes out. It's you want to catch fish and you want to have a bunch of fish caught, then it's hard to beat that. And a lot of the rivers don't have massive runs like the Sea took. They just have enough runs. And if you catch it on the right week, then you can have a great day. But
it's hard. I mean, Juneau systems, like their Peterson Creek is one that we that is a pretty well known one, and then Cowie Creek is also a pretty well known steelhead run, and both of which, I mean, Fish and Game does a float of the Peterson Creek or a snorkel, I should say. They like jump in there with their wetsuits and count the fish, and I don't think that there's any more than 200 fish per year. And I could be wrong. I should read their things before I start chiming off numbers, but it's not a lot of fish. And, oftentimes it's, that creek in particular is so interesting because there's a salt chuck, and then from the salt chuck up to the barrier falls is like 2 miles of creek. And so these fish are jumping from saltwater into a salt chuck, which is influenced by both saltwater and fresh. And then they go straight to the creek and they do their business. And it's such a short amount of area that they go through that they oftentimes are really like they're a man on a mission. And so to trick them into eating your fly is it's a struggle. And I've definitely been out there where I'm like, I see that fish. I've thrown 5 flies at it. It's not happening for me, and that's kind of what steelhead fishing is in Southeast Alaska, though, too. When
you're in south or down south and you're fishing those big rivers, the steelhead goes so far to get up in the river. So if you catch them as they're passing through, you can get on them. But there are some rivers that are no wider than 15 feet on Prince of Wales. And you look at it and you drive over it. There's not even a name for what the creek is. And you drive over it and you think, no, there's no fish ever that go up there except maybe some humpies, because humpies are so prevalent, but there's no way. And then the size of the fish is amazing. People pulling 34-inch steelhead out of a fish, out of a creek that is so small. You think, how does that happen? But they just know, and then they go up there, and they're just so efficient with the time. And they get back out, and it's crazy. It makes no sense, but if you can get one of those fish in the small creeks, but you just got to be right. You can't time ahead. If someone was to ask you, when should I come up? I don't know. A buddy of mine from California came up last year, and I went based on the previous year's schedule when I was doing pretty well, and he came up, and the winter had hung on for an extra 2 weeks, and it was cold. And the water was low, and he caught one in 4 days, and I caught three, and it was pretty rough. And then as soon as he left, it warmed up and it rained, and it was on. But you can't really plan ahead. It's kind of tough to gauge that, because you don't know what's going to happen. All those conditions vary so much.
Yeah, no, they do. I mean, that's part of the draw to steelhead fishing in Alaska, though, right? I mean, that's part of it for me is, I'm constantly watching the river gauges in places, and, constantly like, all right, if it starts raining a little bit and the snow melts a little bit, the water, jumps up a bit, like I'm just going to hop on a plane and go to Yakutat for a couple of days and, camp on the side of the river and go fishing and stuff. And, I say the Sea-Tuck so many times because it's one of the most well-known rivers in Southeast right now. And, I get a phone call every few days about it. And, people are asking, when should I go? When should I go? And, I've gone, the first to second week of May several times. And either you time it right, you time it wrong, you time it right. Or, you never know. Every year is different. And that's part of the fun of it. So it's hard for non-Alaskans to plan around that fun.
Well, even for you, you're going from Juneau to Yakutat. What was the Alaska Airlines ticket? When you say I'm just going to go to Yakutat, it's not like you're driving from Seattle out to the peninsula. Like it's a couple $100 at least one way to get Alaska Airlines up to Yakutat, right?
Yes, yeah, no, it's at least $150 to $200 per ticket. So that's like $500 round trip usually for a weekend of steelhead fishing where you're camping in sometimes very miserable conditions.
Yeah, for a fish you're not going to keep, but
for a fish. Yep.
There are people who golf for their recreation, so it's not all that bad that you spend the money that you do traveling and on the clubs that people do for golf. You replace that with your fly rods and your travel. So it's
yeah, exactly. The big benefit for me from traveling from Juneau to Yakutat is that Alaskans get free bags. Yeah. So I can typically travel with, all of my food and beer.
Yeah, there you go.
That's a benefit.
Well, any closing thoughts there about people, the locals that want to get into fly fishing, especially for steelhead, or things to look forward to, or people who are down south looking to plan a trip? Any closing thoughts for them?
Yeah, the steelhead here. I know you said they're not the fish of 1,000 casts. I still argue that they are. I think that anyone planning a trip or hoping to plan a trip, or anyone, looking to see these fish, you have to put in your time. And that's the hard part is I can't tell you how many trips I've gone out on and not caught a fish, There's been plenty that I've gone out and caught a bunch of fish, but there's also been plenty that I haven't caught any. So that's always something you have to be prepared for. And I just, it sounds sappy, but I love steelhead so much that I just hope that everyone that seeks them out has the mutual respect for them. They're an awesome, amazing fish that, they spawn multiple times. They do all that they can, and they travel such a long way to do their business. So as long as we can respect them, we should keep fishing for them too.
Nice. And then if people want to buy some flies to get ready for their trip up here, what's the website? Where can they buy flies from your shop?
Yeah, so the shop that I work for we're based in Juneau. We're a big online database. The shop is Alaska Fly Fishing Goods, and you can locate us at alaskaflyfishinggoods.com or on social media on the handle of Alaska Fly Fishing Goods. My personal handle is AK Fly Shop Girl on Instagram, and I'm always there as a resource for anyone looking to get into fly fishing.
Awesome. Great. Appreciate you being on here, and good luck next time you go out.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Jeff.
That will do it for this episode. Make sure, as always, you go to themediocrealaskan.com, check out more content, and we'll talk to you next time.